Hello, greetings to everyone. Welcome everyone for coming back to Ghost Stories Vietnam. Before listening to the ghost story, please don't forget to like as well as subscribe to Ghost Stories Vietnam to help the channel. Thank you everyone very much. Wishing everyone an extremely attractive ghost story listening session. And today, we continue to come to the ghost stories that an acquainted friend has retold to the channel. Any of you who have ghost stories you want to send to the channel to tell, you can send them to the Gmail that is currently showing under the description section, everyone. And now, let's begin today's stories. An extremely good story from a female friend from An province sent to our channel. Today's ghost stories from this female friend are entirely the ghost stories from the old days that her paternal grandmother retold to her, everyone. Because she said that in the old days, her grandmother said there were a whole lot of ghosts. Many times when walking on the street, ghosts walked just like normal people, everyone, so after a while, people also just got used to it. So now, let's begin the first story from her. This story is titled, Mrs. Tu Lai Was Murdered in the Sugarcane Field. This story was sent to us by friend Nak, currently living in An. She said that this year her grandmother is already 78 years old, and these stories that the channel is about to tell here happened back when her grandmother was only 10 years old, from back when her grandmother was still very tiny like that, the time when her grandmother was still a young girl. At that time, her grandmother's family lived on Akan, an island formed by river silt deposits rising up in the middle of a large river, commonly seen in the western-southwestern region of Vietnam in An province. At that time, her grandmother used to hang out with a lady. This lady was Mrs. Tu Lai. According to what her grandmother retold, when Mrs. Tu Lai was young, she was extremely hard-working and capable. At just a little over 10 years old, she already knew how to grow vegetables, then bring the vegetables to the market to sell, and could go catch snails and crabs. In general, regarding domestic chores, this Mrs. Tu Lai was extremely skilled and capable. And it was precisely because of this capability, added to her beauty back then, that it was also one of the causes leading to her death. Her grandmother retold that on the day Mrs. Tu Lai met her tragic fate, there were still 13 days left until the 14th day, a major Ram full moon day, which specific lunar month's full moon it was, her grandmother did not mention. Everything just started from right here. That afternoon, it was already getting completely dark. At that time it was about 4 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Normally, every afternoon around that hour, Mrs. Tu Lai would go across next to the house where there was a whole large patch of vegetables. She went over there to harvest them to bunch the vegetables up, preparing early the next morning to bring them to the market to sell. At this time, inside the house, there was only the husband of her maternal aunt, her uncle-in-law. While next to the house, Mrs. Tu Lai was bending over, busily harvesting vegetables. At that moment, when realizing that inside the house there was only one male and one female, and furthermore, the young girl next to the house happened to be his wife's young niece, who was still young and blooming, the animalistic lust inside Uncle Nam Phuc surged up. He came up with the idea to lure Mrs. Tu Lai out to the sugarcane field to murder her and commit an atrocious assault against her out there. Therefore, right at this moment, Uncle Nam Phuc called out to Mrs. Tu Lai, come out here to the back, bunch up a few vegetable bundles for your uncle, so tomorrow morning when you go sell them you won't have to harvest anymore. I already have vegetables ready right here behind the kitchen. At that time, hearing that, Mrs. Tu Lai was very glad because she was about to have vegetables to go sell without having to go out here to harvest them anymore. So Mrs. Tu Lai followed the path to go behind the kitchen to sit there and bunch the vegetables. And the friend retold that at that time, at the location of her grandmother's house, because it was out on a river island, during that era people only planted sugarcane for sugar and planted jicama, so every house had sugarcane plots and sugarcane gardens, surrounding the houses was nothing but sugarcane. And starting at this moment, when seeing Mrs. Tu Lai sitting, deeply engrossed in bunching each bundle of vegetables, Uncle Nam Phuc stood behind, having prepared everything. Right at that exact moment, he wrestled Mrs. Tu Lai down, pinned her down, and committed the atrocious assault against her. Because Mrs. Tulai was attacked in such a sudden manner, Mrs. Tulai screamed for the village extremely fiercely, but at that time, houses were far apart from each other, and every single house had a sugarcane field, so who could hear her to help? That hour was also a twilight dusk. The local people at that hour had already closed all their house doors. At this moment, when seeing that Mrs. Tulai was screaming for the village way too fiercely, Uncle Nam Phuc unwrapped from his neck a conran, a traditional checkered scarf of southern Vietnamese farmers. This was the scarf he usually used to wipe sweat every time he went to work in the fields. He unwrapped it and strangled Mrs. Tulai's neck until she stopped breathing entirely. After a few minutes of using that scarf to strangle Mrs. Tulai's neck, at this time, due to being strangled, Mrs. Tulai's tongue began to stick out very terribly. But after Mrs. Tulai had completely stopped breathing, he was still extremely calm. He looked all around the area of the sugarcane field to see if the local people had returned yet, and he noticed that the people working the fields were only preparing to return but had not actually reached their houses yet. Therefore, at this moment, he went to find sugarcane leaves, which were the leaves people had stripped off from the sugarcane stalks. He gathered a bunch of those leaves together and covered the corpse of Mrs. Tulai. After having finished his task, Uncle Nam Phuc also brushed off his hands and walked back home, acting as if nothing had happened at all. During this time over at Mrs. Tulai's house, her mother was also lying down waiting. Usually, around 5 to 6 o'clock in the afternoon, she would have already returned home, but today she went over toward her uncle's house to harvest vegetables and it was already dark by this hour, so why hadn't she been seen returning? Therefore, Mrs. Tulai's mother walked out to the front. Out there, a hammock was strung up, so she got onto the hammock and kept swaying back and forth waiting for her daughter to return. While lying there waiting continuously without seeing Mrs. Tulai return, her mother just lay there swaying, and after a while, she also dozed off into sleep. In her sleep, her mother had an extremely strange dream. Suddenly, her mother saw her return. She spoke to her mother with an extremely sad face, saying, "Mother, please go out to the sugarcane field and bring my corpse back, or go out to the river bank to look for my corpse because they threw me down into the river. I am so cold, Mother." Suddenly seeing a dream like that, Mrs. Tulai's mother startled awake. She didn't know if this was a real dream or not, but she felt a deep sense of insecurity inside her body. At that moment, her mother's mood was both insecure and worried in her heart. Now, it was impossible not to believe because it was already past 8 o'clock, nearly 9 o'clock at night, and her young daughter had still not returned. Therefore, she began to cry out loudly, calling everyone in the house as well as calling the neighbors to rush out to go search, to see why the girl Lai went to harvest vegetables but had vanished completely. They searched everywhere in the neighborhood but could not find her. At this moment, her mother remembered the dream, because she had said to go out to the sugarcane field to find her corpse, while earlier that afternoon she had gone over toward her uncle's house to harvest vegetables, so everyone went over to that side to search. When everyone went over to that side to search for a while, they then discovered that near the sugarcane field, right adjacent to the sugarcane field was a water ditch. Right along that ditch, the corpse of Mrs. Tulai was floating dynamically right at that spot, with sugarcane leaves piled up covering it. At that moment, everyone stood completely frozen because everyone saw that Mrs. Tulai's clothes were disheveled, looking exactly as if they had been stripped off. That era was already 50 or 60 years ago, so at that time, they didn't call any police or authorities. They automatically went to search, and when they found the corpse, they just brought the corpse back home to hold a funeral. As for Mrs. Tulai's mother, she fainted repeatedly, losing consciousness entirely, not knowing anything anymore. After that horrific night, everyone also brought Mrs. Tulai's corpse back to conduct the funeral as normal. Just 12 days later, Mrs. Tulai's mother saw her return again. Everyone. At that time, the local people lived entirely in stilt houses, so the houses were floored with wooden planks. Between those planks, there would be gaps. Late that night, while Mrs. Tulai's mother was sleeping, she had a dream where she saw Mrs. Tulai return, standing underneath the stilt floor of the house, looking through the gaps. and then looking up to speak to her mother with an extremely sad face, saying, "Mother, I was murdered by someone out in the sugarcane field." At this time in the dream, her mother also said, "Now I know, tomorrow I will go over to the sugarcane field area and grab those young men nearby to ask them to see if they did anything to you." But at this moment in the dream, Mrs. Tulai answered her mother like this. She said, "It wasn't a stranger who killed me, mother, but an acquaintance, and this person is family on the inside but behaves like a stranger on the outside." Having said that, Mrs. Tulai did not say anything else. Therefore, after waking up, Mrs. Tulai's mother found it extremely strange, because she also did not understand what Mrs. Tulai meant by family on the inside but behaves like a stranger on the outside. When her mother woke up, she cried heavily. The relatives in the house also ran over to ask, and then her mother also told them about family on the inside but behaves like a stranger on the outside, and everyone did not understand either. And it was absolutely true. At that time, the government apparatus was still very loose, so a dozen days later, on the 14th full moon day, the local authorities finally came down to the scene to find the cause. At this point, what was there left to find? And in the end, they couldn't find anything at all. Now returning to the story of Uncle Nam Phuc's family, who was the uncle-in-law of Mrs. Tulai. At that time, Uncle Nam Phuc had a wife, and this wife was precisely the maternal aunt, the biological sister of Mrs. Tulai's mother. Because she was pregnant, during the days of Mrs. Tulai's funeral, this aunt did not go to attend the funeral because she said having a pregnancy meant going to a funeral would not be lucky, affecting the small child, so she stayed at home. As for Uncle Nam Phuc, he also did not go to the funeral either. He excused himself with the reason that he was busy with something, so he did not go over to attend. But the strange thing here was that just 1 week after the day of Mrs. Tulai's funeral, the maternal aunt, who was the wife of Uncle Nam Phuc, for some unknown reason, her pregnancy, which had been perfectly normal, at that point began to bleed heavily from her private area, discharging blood continuously just like vomiting blood. Seeing that her blood was coming out so much, fearing it would affect the fetus, the aunt went out to the local clinic to get examined. The doctors out there examined her and said the fetus was completely normal, it didn't have any issues, but from the moment she returned home from there, this aunt kept losing weight and her face was extremely pale. She lost a great deal of weight. Suddenly at this time, the people in the village saw the aunt. Why was her body shrinking away day by day like that, exactly like a soulless corpse? Therefore, people rumored, not knowing if it was related to spirituality, or perhaps this family, this couple, was involved in the death of Mrs. Tulai. The rumors went back and forth until they reached the ears of Mrs. Tulai's mother. After connecting all the events together, she finally realized that on that day, her daughter had gone to harvest vegetables at Uncle Nam Phuc's house, so she knew for certain the person who murdered her daughter was precisely Uncle Nam Phuc. Who else could it be but her own brother-in-law? Therefore, that very day, Mrs. Tulai's mother went up to her altar, lit incense, and prayed, "Oh my child, if your uncle murdered you, please spare your aunt. After all, she is your biological aunt and she is carrying a fetus in her body." And it must be acknowledged that Mrs. Tulai was extremely potent and sacred because she died young and was murdered. So that night, Mrs. Tulai also returned to report a dream to her mother, saying, "I should have killed uncle a long time ago, but because his lifespan is not yet meant to end, it's impossible, so now I will kill the small child inside his wife's womb so that he can never have a child to carry on his lineage. He murdered me, so he must pay with his life." But in that dream, Mrs. Tulai's mother also cried a great deal. Her mother also begged, saying, "Please, my child, after all, she is our own aunt, everyone pays for their own karma, now she is your aunt, if you harm her it will be too miserable for her, so please let it go, my child. As for that man who harmed you, heaven will harm him." After seeing her mother crying heavily, Mrs. Tulai also promised her mother that she would not harm him anymore. Because her daughter promised she would not kill him, Mrs. Tulai's mother brought this case completely to light. Mrs. Tulai's mother filed a lawsuit to the court, and after the authorities investigated thoroughly, they also arrested that uncle, but because he had status and power, he was able to bribe his way through and was only imprisoned for about 3 years. As for the time after that, this Mrs. Two Lie haunted and terrified one person after another in the village. Everyone was haunted by her. Also, because Mrs. Two Lie died when she was still extremely young, even after the person who killed her was sentenced, Mrs. Two Lie still haunted people like a daily meal. And in particular, Mrs. Two Lie very frequently haunted people who went to work the fields, specifically at the sugarcane fields near the location where Mrs. Two Lie was murdered. People rumored that she was so potent that she only haunted people right in the middle of the day. She didn't even bother to haunt people at night. For example, the couple Uncle Nam back then, this couple were the landowners, so at noon they had to carry a pot of rice out to cook for the laborers to eat out in the fields. The two of them, one person carried the food while the husband carried the rice pot on his head. While the couple was carrying the pile of food out to the middle of the field for the laborers to eat, as the two of them walked, one in front and one behind, they kept hearing thumping footsteps right behind them, exactly as if someone was walking extremely fast, chasing right behind their backs. The couple looked back, turned around, but right in the middle of broad daylight, they didn't see anyone. At that moment, when hearing the footsteps, the couple by reflex also turned around. When they turned around, do you know what happened, everyone? Right at midday, they didn't see a body, but only saw a single face that was huge, exactly like a large tray. Ma'am, it just moved along the dirt dike path like that, following the couple. And let me tell you, the couple dropped the rice pot completely. The rice pot on the head was tossed right down, falling over, and they ran with all their might out toward the middle of the field. At that moment, the laborers were sitting there waiting for the rice. When they got out there, the couple recounted, "Oh heavens, I just saw a face exactly like a large tray chasing after the two of us. Everyone, now we've left the rice pot in the middle of the field, so this noon let's skip a meal." When they got out there and regained their composure, the husband said its face was round and huge, exactly like a large tray, and look, its two fangs stuck out as it laughed out loud, haha, like that. The couple had run far from the house but could still hear its laughter echoing across the entire field. When everyone heard that description, everyone knew it was Mrs. Two Lie haunting them, because in the old days there was never any occurrence of being haunted at midday. It was only from the day she died that people were haunted so much like that. And especially, it was entirely hauntings by the tray-face ghost style. Whenever she manifested, only the face was visible, a face that was massive and glaringly huge. Then it came to her grandmother being haunted. At that time, her grandmother helped her parents go out to the fields to plant mung beans. Because they were planting mung beans, in the old days, people carried 2 watering cans down to the ditch to scoop water. Then they held those 2 cans to water both sides of the vegetable rows, everyone, watering like that until noon when they got tired. Every day she went out to tend that mung bean plot to water it, and because the house was far away, at noon she would rest at the base of that tree instead of going back, continuing to work in the afternoon before going home, and she also brought rice along to eat. After having finished eating the rice, working the fields was tiring, so her afternoon nap was very deep. Her grandmother placed a conical hat over her face to make it dark and easy to sleep. While sleeping, she kept hearing a sound on the conical hat, exactly as if someone was using 2 hands, taking their fingers to scratch and claw at the conical hat, hearing it go scratch, scratch, scratch like that. And at the same time while sleeping, her grandmother also had a feeling that her face was suffocating, exactly as if someone was standing, leaning their face right close to her face. Opening the conical hat, she was utterly terrified. It was also that tray face from before, the tray face that everyone in the village had seen. Overwhelmed with fear, she threw the conical hat aside and ran straight back home, abandoning the field and stopping work. After running with all her might back to the house, her grandmother told her parents, "I was haunted by a ghost, I just saw a huge face like that." And her grandmother even described it. This face bared its teeth. Its teeth were quite even, but each tooth was larger than the teeth of our normal humans, and furthermore, the tip of each tooth was very sharp, just like a sharp stake. Everyone, imagine it exactly like a fence that was flipped upside down. It wasn't a normal human set of teeth at all. Therefore, her grandmother's mother washed her grandmother with some kind of leaf water. A whole month later, her grandmother finally regained her composure and finally dared to go out there to water the beans, but she didn't dare to stay late anymore, and at noon she didn't dare to stay there either. A long period of time passed later. After her grandmother had gotten married, her grandmother was haunted by this lady once again. That day, her grandmother also went out to work the fields. While walking on the canal bank, she suddenly heard someone walking thump 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 behind her. After walking a long distance, her grandmother was suddenly pelted with dirt from behind her back, pelted continuously. Turning her back, she didn't see anyone. Her grandmother walked for a moment and got very angry, so she stopped completely. After walking for a moment and being pelted with dirt heavily, seeing that her grandmother was very angry, her grandmother stopped completely. Turning her face around, the source from which the dirt was thrown at her was a row of water celery. It was a row of water celery, everyone, from that spot. At this moment, her grandmother was not one to back down either. Her grandmother was very brave. She dug up a few dirt clods near where she stood and threw them back across into that water celery patch. After throwing for a while, the entire water celery patch collapsed completely, but still no one was visible, yet that spot kept throwing dirt back at her grandmother. Therefore, at this point she ran, abandoning the spot to run elsewhere, and while running, she could still hear the sound of laughter coming from the water celery patch, even though the water celery patch was flattened. Therefore, that day she didn't do any field work at all. She went straight home in one breath. The next day, the owner of that water celery patch saw the state it was in, so they came to complain. They knew that her grandmother worked the fields there and must have stepped on or done something to damage their row of vegetables. The next day they demanded compensation, so she just had to compensate them with money. What else could be done? At that time, after being haunted, her grandmother also knew, so every time she went out to work the fields, she also prayed in her mind. Her grandmother made vows to Mrs. Tulai. Her grandmother said, "Back then when you were still alive, you and I knew each other but were not close. But anyway, now you are dead, please don't haunt me anymore, I am so scared. You haunt me, so how can I dare to go out to the fields to farm anything anymore? Please leave me alone to make a living." From then on, she was not haunted anymore. Otherwise, every time she didn't pray, she would be haunted from mildly to severely. She was always haunted. After stopping haunting the field workers, she began to haunt the men who went to cast fish nets in the river. Everyone. Take Uncle Tam near her grandmother's house. That night, he also went to cast fish nets as normal. He cast his net down into the river like this, and when pulling it up, he saw Mrs. Tulai lying swaying inside the net, turning her face up and laughing out loud, haha. At that moment, he threw away the entire net, running from the field all the way into the house. Because in the old days, going to cast fish nets out in the large water ditches in the fields meant casting was sure to get fish, a whole lot of fish. He was too scared, so he ran back home and lay there until a whole month later before he dared to go cast fish nets again. Besides that, her mother also frequently saw her return. It wasn't to haunt her or anything, since she was her mother, but she returned to remind her of this and that. For example, every time her mother took an afternoon nap, that day while she was taking an afternoon nap, she saw Mrs. Tulai return and say, "Mother, the custard apple fruit in front of the house is ripe. Why don't you harvest it inside? A worm has already eaten a hole in it. It's ripe so it can be eaten now. Harvest it, don't leave it. If you leave it a moment longer, people will steal it just the same." When her mother hurriedly walked out to the front, she could see the custard apple tree. The custard apple fruit was indeed ripe. Harvesting it down, she saw it had a hole eaten by maggots, so it was absolutely true that she had returned to remind her to harvest the custard apple down to eat. For many years afterward, this Mrs. Tulai still returned to report dreams to her mother, giving her mother numbers because she wanted her mother to play Soda, a local lottery betting game based on state lottery results, to have money to cover life's expenses. But her mother's personality was that she didn't like lottery betting, so every time she returned and gave numbers, her mother took those numbers and gave them to relatives and neighbors. Then when people played the numbers, everyone won, only her mother didn't play, so she didn't win. At that time, after receiving numbers from her mother, the relatives and neighbors all played and everyone won, only her mother alone didn't win because she didn't play to win. Therefore, after those instances, she returned and reproached her mother, saying, "Why did I give you numbers but you didn't play? You just went and gave them to other people. From now on, I won't report dreams to you anymore." But the important thing was that her mother said for her to go reincarnate. Don't come up here to give numbers to this person and that person anymore. It wasn't good. Why didn't she go reincarnate but kept coming up here to haunt people constantly like that? But during that instance, also because she saw her mother crying a lot, she promised that she would not return to haunt people anymore. But regarding the matter of playing the lottery, the people in the village by this time knew about it. They flocked out to her grave, every day going out there to beg for lottery numbers, and everyone won. Out of a 7-day week, they won a full 4 days. Therefore, at that time, those local lottery owners, because people won the lottery so much, those men went completely bankrupt, having no more money left to pay out, so they shut down their businesses and closed their doors. After the affair where the entire village of this Mrs. Tulai all won the lottery, that affair caused a complete sensation because those lottery owners had all run away, having no money left to pay. Therefore, those men were extremely angry, so they went to find a master, a sorcerer, with the intention of going out to Mrs. Tulai's grave to pour black dog blood, which according to folk spiritual beliefs is used to neutralize spiritual energy and seal powerful souls, and use talismans and sorcery to seal her grave, preventing her soul from rising up to give lottery numbers to people anymore. At that time, the sorcerer's side had fixed the date, preparing to go out to her grave secretly to perform the tomb sealing. Therefore, before that day, she returned to speak to her mother, saying, "Mother, please go out to my grave. There are people preparing to bind me, not allowing me to achieve liberation. Now you must go out and tell them to ask them to perform a requiem mass for me. Don't seal me. Don't pour black dog blood onto my grave anymore, otherwise I cannot achieve liberation." Mother. At that moment, her mother woke up and was completely terrified. She told everyone to go out to her grave immediately the next morning. Just as they got out there, they discovered those masters preparing their gear, and the black dog blood was already prepared to be poured onto the grave. But luckily, when seeing her mother screaming fiercely, the masters also calmed down. And at that time, both sides of the families also negotiated with each other. Her mother also said, "Alright, now you masters should just perform a requiem ceremony to pray for liberation for my child. Don't seal her anymore. She won't return anymore." And it was also thanks to her reporting the dream to her mother in time, otherwise, she would never have been able to go reincarnate. After that sensational affair, she didn't come up to haunt anyone anymore, and no one ever saw this lady again. After everything had become peaceful and she no longer returned to haunt people, her maternal aunt, the wife of Uncle Nam Phuc, also gave birth to the child safely, mother and child both well, nothing went wrong. Presumably, she also listened to her mother and let go, sparing her aunt, otherwise it would have affected that small child. Afterward, Uncle Nam Phuc was also released from prison, and as for whether later on he still went around causing trouble or committing atrocious acts against other young girls or not, her grandmother did not retold. And this is only the first story from her, everyone, but we will end the story right here, while the second story the channel will tell in the next episode, everyone. Before ending the story, everyone please don't forget to like as well as subscribe to the YouTube channel to help the channel. As for how you find this story, you can leave a comment below for everyone to know together. Now let's wait for the next story episode, everyone, greetings to everyone.